Okay, hello. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. We weren't expecting such a big venue, so we'll do our best to fill the space. My name's Rachel. I am an associate professor in medical education at the University of Leicester and a consultant psychiatrist. For the last few years, I've been working for the Stonygate Centre for Empathic Healthcare. And my research and education interests really lie in creating reflective, relational and compassionate practices for our current and future workforce. I'm particularly interested in empathy-focused training and the benefits that it brings to participants, as well as patients. I work specifically at the moment with a team at the centre to consider the role of literary arts and creative writing to foster empathy and professional identity in medical students. And this work, I think, really seeks to put narrative at the heart of clinical practice and to deepen our understanding of others and also self-awareness to cultivate resilience and rehumanize healthcare. So we have a panel discussion today. I'm going to introduce Penny, Benji and Helen. Benji, as you can see, is an empty chair at the moment. He's going to be joining us on Zoom. He's had a bit of an injury to his foot and couldn't travel up from London, so he will hopefully appear any moment on Zoom. And there he is, magic. Hello, Benji.
Hi.
So I'm going to introduce Penny first. So Dr. Penny Campling is a psychiatrist and psychotherapist who has over 40 years' experience of working in mental health services. For 20 years, she ran the NHS Personality Unit or Disorder Unit in Leicester. Penny has led truly pioneering work in relational psychiatry, shaping services that are compassionate, kind, and collaborative. She's now retired from the NHS, but continues to work independently. She also writes and campaigns for improvements across the health services, but particularly in psychiatry, really helping clinicians and our current leaders to understand what good mental health care should look like. She's the author of many books, including Intelligent Kindness, which looks at how we can develop and sustain healthy organisational culture and effective humane practice. And more recently, On the Brink, stories of harm and healing from a lifetime in psychiatry. And Penny's blend of clinical wisdom and reflective practice and an unwavering commitment to both person-centred care and practitioner well-being make her an exceptional and inspiring voice. Dr. Benji Waterhouse is a consultant psychiatrist and acclaimed author of the best-selling memoir, You Don't Have to Be Mad to Work Here. Benji is widely recognised for his creativity, humour, and the insights that he brings to an often hidden side of mental health care. Alongside his medical and writing careers, Benji is a successful comedian and a commentator, and he's described how writing has allowed introspection and an anchor that has helped him confront burnout and restore a sense of meaning and well-being in his work. His unique ability to combine with both humour and sincerity the stories of his patients and events in his own life really illustrate his empathic and highly reflective approach to clinical care. Benji's writing integrates sharp observations, creative talent, and disarming honesty, making his voice an important and refreshing one in contemporary psychiatry. And then finally, Helen. So Dr. Helen Foster is a creative writing associate. I work with Helen at the Stonygate Centre for Empathic Healthcare, and she's a passionate advocate for the role of creativity in improving the experience of both patients and practitioners. Helen brings a rich combination of academic insight, narrative skill, and hands-on experience to her work, championing the power of storytelling as a tool for empathy, reflection, and connection within healthcare. Helen has extensive background in community-engaged creative writing and facilitation, leading projects across the NHS and in a variety of community settings that invite people to explore their experiences, articulate their voices, and find meaning through narrative. Her workshops and collaborations have supported clinicians in developing reflective capacity, helped patients and service users communicate their stories more fully, and fostered environments where empathy can flourish. She's currently working on a project in Leicester called Menopause Poetics that really showcases, I think, her passion and her skills. So there's a really long history between medicine and the arts. Narrative has always been a way to help us make sense of illness, health, and the human experience. And more recently, I think this relationship has been revisited, particularly in the last couple of decades, through the fields of narrative medicine, but also through creative writing and more creative practice. There's an increasing focus on research studies seeking to identify the benefits for those taking part in training, as well as the potential clinical impact. Systematic reviews have continuously shown that educational interventions, including those in literary arts, can not only enhance empathy for others, but also help people connect more fully with their colleagues and better understand themselves. And often those who take part in training describe the effect as something that is therapeutic, restorative, and sustaining. So today's discussion aims to bring together those with experience in healthcare and in writing, and to explore why literary arts matter in healthcare, what difference writing has made personally to them, and how we might better integrate creative practices more meaningfully into clinical education. So I'm going to ask, to start us off, I'm going to ask Penny to read from her book. So On the Brink, and you don't have to be mad to work here. I'm just going to put out a plug, because I don't know if Benji and Penny will, but they are brilliant books. They're really inspiring, eye-opening, written beautifully, and they're not just for people who work in healthcare or psychiatry. Many of my friends and families will be getting their books for Christmas, and I can really recommend them. I think they're pretty much available in every bookshop you can find. So, little plug for their work, which is brilliant. But Penny.
Come over.
I'll take this with me.
Thank you. So I'm going to read from my book, On the Brink, which is stories from my career, which I've used to try and understand better and explore the relationship between our society and mental health. And I'm going to read from a chapter called A Global Trauma, which is about the work I did during the pandemic, supporting, in my role as psychiatrist and psychotherapist, the staff employed in the intensive care units in Leicester. Aware of how isolated so many of my patients are feeling, I've started to hold face-to-face sessions in my garden under a makeshift shelter with a small heater. It is apparent to me that there is something dangerously depersonalizing about working in the intensive care unit during this pandemic, not helped by being locked into PPE for hours on end. I hope that sitting in the garden with a pot of tea between us and rugs on our laps will provide more human warmth than a Zoom call. It is highly unconventional, but given the number of clinicians who choose this option, despite the freezing temperatures, I think my intuition on this one is right. Kevin, a nurse on the intensive care unit, comes to see me after suffering a serious panic attack that has floored him. Unlike those whose panic attacks are clearly directly connected to the distressing circumstances at work, Kevin's terror erupted in the supermarket car park of all places, the sudden escalation and force of the pain sending him crashing to the tarmac. By the time of our first session, he's been off work for a few weeks and has already had some basic CBT sessions with the hospital counselling service. Although the physiology of panic attacks is clear to him and he's dutifully learnt some relaxation techniques, he is still sceptical and seeks me out as a doctor. He can't shift the idea that he really has suffered a heart attack, even though he was taken to the emergency department where the usual battery of investigations all came back normal. It's left me so ill, he explains, his eyes appealing to me to take him seriously. A panic attack can be seen as an acute physical expression of fear that is perhaps too overwhelming for the mind to tolerate. But the actual experience of panic can be traumatic in itself. The sudden, unpredicted onset, the sense of one's whole body being out of control, a condensed experience of helplessness that leaves behind a heavy ball of anxiety long after the physical symptoms have subsided. The potential for escalation is obvious, and my job is to help Kevin break this vicious circle. As we talk it through, it emerges just how terrifying the experience was. Kevin's been told it was just anxiety, but he was convinced by the magnitude of his symptoms that he was going to die. This traumatic aspect of the experience and the way it links to his ICU work has been ignored. I ask him to describe his last nursing shift. He needs a lot of coaxing, but eventually tells me that a lot of the patients in the unit at that time were healthcare workers, one of whom he knew. What had really upset him, though, was the death of a man with 2 children exactly the same ages as his own. ICU staff are used to patients dying, but it is unusual in this day and age for people who were well a week or 2 earlier to get so ill so quickly and deteriorate so rapidly. I couldn't get over the fact that he'd been perfectly well 3 weeks earlier, he tells me, and it was awful, really horrible death. I can still remember his eyes when he was first admitted to the unit and realized where he was. They seemed to be fixed on me and so full of fear, like every breath was killing him. He was begging me to do something. Kevin is now looking anxious, sweat on his forehead, hands tightly gripping the arms of the chair, but he battles on, trying to describe the particular quality of the respiratory distress. It was unbearable. Every breath was just so painful, and each breath, you couldn't quite believe he'd manage it. I could feel it starting to cut through me. It was like I was trying to find the breath for him. I recently sat with my dad as he died of heart failure and realized that I had to concentrate to keep my own breathing steady. It made me wonder if the nurses' panic attacks might be linked to the torturous, effortful, gasping breaths of their critically ill COVID patients. It's so easy to unconsciously mirror the posture and breathing of someone in close proximity, the distress communicated from muscle to muscle, from lungs to lungs. Working as a psychotherapist through the pandemic forced me to think a lot about fear. Like most of my patients, I had more nightmares than usual, weird and hellish, waking in a panic, my unconscious mind bubbling to the surface, a midnight message that I was more frightened about what was going on than I realized. It was not just frontline staff and mental health patients who were struggling. The pandemic affected us all.
Thank you. So, I think we can all agree that there are kind of unprecedented pressures at the moment in medicine. There's burnout, disillusionment, moral injury, workforce shortages, obviously the strikes that are happening at the moment, and potentially a lack of empathy. I think there's a real sense too that the system just doesn't really leave room for thinking or feeling. So, Penny, I think that relates really well to your reading, but can you tell us, why did you choose that reading, and why do you think writing matters now and in healthcare?
I chose that reading actually because I wanted to get back to COVID, because I think we've moved on from it much too quickly. I work independently now as a psychotherapist, and a lot of my patients are doctors, and so many of them still have stories from that time that they've not actually spoken out loud. And it's almost like we all have a novel in us about the pandemic. And I think, those, as I say, that a lot of those stories have still to be told. It was a very unusual and frightening time. And I guess I chose it as well because it was a bit of writing, and I can remember doing it actually. And sometimes writing can be sort of exploratory, and you discover things as you write. So the sort of linking it with my father's death, who also died during that COVID period, felt quite important to me. And actually that insight, and it's not I'm not the only one to think about posture and breathing and stuff being really important, but actually it was writing that made those links for me, and I used that insight quite a lot later on, and I still do with patients kind of helping them think about how they're breathing. So that was helpful.
Okay. So Benji, let's bring you in as well. So, what do you think in terms of what writing can offer and why now, I guess, in healthcare? And thinking specifically, I guess, building on what Penny said, do you think that writing has helped you process difficult clinical encounters or things that have happened in practice?
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to join you virtually. I didn't only agree to do this if my face was blown up to godly proportions. But yeah, unfortunately, I have injured myself. But yeah, nice to be with you. Yeah, I think the first part of your question, Rachel, was it about why I write?
Yeah, why write?
Why I write, and then what I get out of it. Why I write and why now? For me, I write because it helps me to work out what I think about things. It helps me just the act of literally slowing down with your pen on the paper in our very fast-paced society. I think just helps me to process stuff, and I'm very lucky. I have the luxury of being part-time, which means that I do have time to reflect and write books and TV and things like that, which I know not everyone does, but I think I can see the benefits sometimes even in my work. I work in emergency psychiatry where there are always far too many patients and never enough staff or beds, and so very much the drive is on so-called admission avoidance and essentially telling people that they're not that bad and to kind of go away and come back when they're worse, and find creative ways for discharging them. And there's even this grubby term that's come into the language where people are using this phrase, the compassionate discharge, where people are kind of kicked out under the guise of kindness. And we had a leaving do recently for a colleague, which is obviously happening increasingly frequently. And I was just reflecting in this more social environment about how I sometimes wonder how helpful what we're doing really is, and if we're actually helping people in the long term, or we're just putting off the problem, and if actually we're causing more harm than good. And some quite senior people who I was sitting next to just said, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." And these are like managers in my team. But I think, in their defense, they are just so overwhelmed with this conveyor belt of patients and of need. There is not the space for thinking. So I write to try and give me that space to retain my humanity and remember my values and why I went into medicine, which was to try and help people not find creative ways to withhold help from them.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we can all register with that. It can be pretty distressing, actually, can't it, working in healthcare at times. So thinking, I mean, Helen, if we bring you in as well, thinking specifically about the benefits that writing can offer. You've worked in all these different teams and areas, lots of community engagement, but also in healthcare. What do you think are the benefits of writing? Benji's touched on this kind of ability to slow down and to process what's happened. And Penny's talked about making connections between patients now and later and her own experiences. What other kind of therapeutic potential does writing offer?
Yeah, well, I suppose for me, I came to this world of writing. I'm obviously from a very non-clinical background. But it was through doing creative writing as a PhD that it became very academicised, if that's the word, and began to feel quite boxed in. And I instead of focusing on that drive of writing for publication, I began to actually enjoy the process of writing and seeing that as a way, well, I began to experience it as a way of being quite liberated, I suppose. And that's what I kind of bring into the workshops that I deliver, ideas around decluttering your mind, kind of just getting the stuff that's in there out onto that blank page. And through doing that, you kind of discover things that you didn't think you were thinking about, and they kind of come up as well. So there's a sort of organisational quality to it. But the thing about just writing as well is very much that idea of not having rules to it. The writing process is therapeutic, so not not writing for the purposes of producing something, but just writing in the moment in a very mindful way quite often can be really good. And not censoring yourself, just allowing whatever is in there to come out. And yeah, it helps you to slow down. Reading back what you've written as well and reflecting on that. Creating meaning and finding meaning in things that you may have been carrying around with you as well. And just creating that space, and I suppose actually having the space to write is quite a privilege for lots of people involved in healthcare, because it's such a busy lifestyle. Yeah, and gaining, I think, gradually gaining that emotional insight and trusting the process, I think, as you write.
Yeah. Okay, so, and I think some of the things that you've touched on there are quite helpful to take on. So obviously this session is titled Reflective Practice, and we're talking about kind of creative writing and reading, shared reading, the literary arts, and how these can make us better, more reflective practitioners. But I don't think we can ignore the fact that reflection's really become quite a bureaucratic requirement in medical education and certainly in clinical practice. My own view from personally and also from talking to people in different disciplines, to medical students, to clinicians, to trainees, a lot of people really distrust and resent reflective practice. You know, it's prescribed, they feel they're forced to do it. I think there's the potential to feel blamed as well, or to expose yourself in some way that you might be blamed for something if you're writing it down as a mistake that you made and then being asked to reflect on it. So, and Penny, what do you think makes traditional reflective practice feel quite hollow and unsafe?
I think it's always difficult, isn't it, when you've got to do something. It feels very different from when you generate the impulse to do it yourself. And as soon as it becomes a sort of tick box exercise, it turns into something else, and that's so sad. I remember, I think it was Grayson Perry in his Wreath lectures talking about how some words he feels are so precious he doesn't want to let them out, because he knows if he lets them out they become commodified and turned into something different. And I kind of feel like that's happened to reflective practice in the medical profession. It's become something it shouldn't be, really. I mean, I think there are some very real issues, and I think, first of all, let's start. I mean, writing can be, as well as hugely helpful and therapeutic, it can actually be quite painful and difficult. And there's that, you can find yourself writing, getting in touch with feelings you didn't know were there. But you can also, I always feel a little bit regressed when I'm asking something I've written that I feel quite precious about. Maybe because I've revealed something difficult about myself, or maybe just because I feel I've just done a good bit of work, but it puts me back in touch with being a child and sort of handing over something to a parent or a teacher to be judged. You're kind of worried about being judged. So I think that's sort of inherent in writing, and that can be certainly overcome. But then if you add in a sort of persecutory medical, very anxious, highly anxious medical system as it is at the moment, I think that puts it on another level, really. And I think we have to be incredibly careful what we advise our trainees as regards reflective writing. I mean, I come from Leicester with and most of you will remember the case of Dr. Baragara, who was, she did something, she made a mistake. She'd just come back from maternity leave, her consultants weren't on site, all sorts of mitigating circumstances, but she could have ended up going to prison. And actually she was encouraged by her consultant to write reflectively about it, and did that, and then that was used in court against her. So I think the medical profession has found it hard to sort of recover from that. And I think, we all know that happens in small ways. So I think we need to be really careful about, yes, encourage people to write, but they need to be very clear if they're writing for themselves or if they're writing for other people, and how the readers are going to see it. We have to get better at reading reflective practice. There's so much in the health service that puts the the onus on the individual. I always think that's about whistleblowing. We're forever kind of coming up with new initiatives around whistleblowing, but there's been loads of whistleblowing, junior staff who then get into awful trouble, and actually, it's the people that are actually going to listen when the person dares to whistleblow. And I think so. We need to be very just help people think about which forums they can share different bits.
Benji, anything to add to that? And thinking, I guess, as well about how, when we're thinking about reflective writing for purpose, or reflective writing, or creative writing, or narrative writing, in the way that Helen talked about being uncensored, and maybe the process of writing and how it can be beneficial without having to write a polished piece that is going to be read for someone. Like, how can we use narrative writing, creative writing, to reclaim reflection for the individual?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, but I do definitely agree that something it does change when someone is going to read it. It's like you write very differently in your diary if you know your mum is going to read it, for example. And I suppose as well to that end, even like in what I've been doing more recently, when in writing a book, I suppose on one level people do compliment the honesty of my book, but also. There is that phenomenon, the Hawthorne effect, which is that you do just behave and share more. You do share differently when you know you're going to be observed by others. So how we return it to a pure form, I'm not totally sure. But yeah, all I do know is that I do believe there's value in it. And I guess it is, there's the rise of the fact that it's become just mandatory. That obviously takes the joy out of it. And also, I think the digital age and AI is really going to make things more difficult, because when we're asking the robots to do our reflections for us just to satisfy, our appraisals or whatever. And I hear nowadays people in medical education saying things like medical students get annoyed if they get given if their assignments aren't emailed to them, because then they have to literally type out the title into ChatGPT before asking them how, to write it. So yes, I don't know.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
I was thinking about, I looked just to prepare for this event, I was looking back through things I got published really early on in my career. And the first two papers, the first paper I got published was called A Jaundiced View. That was a BMJ personal view. And the second one was called On Being Good Enough, Bad Enough, and Never Getting It Right. So it makes me sound like I was very depressive. But actually, I mean, the first one was a very kind of heartfelt exposure of a struggle I'd had. I'd caught hepatitis A after 6 weeks after my second child was born, and got hepatitis, and then I got left with one of those horrible kind of chronic inflammatory liver conditions that went on for a couple of years. So I was really struggling, and it was the days when you went back to, you couldn't extend your maternity leave, so you had to be back after 5 or 6 months, and it was, you're desperate to prove yourself. I mean, it was, nowadays we forget, but so many psychiatrists and GPs particularly are women. But in those days, I think there were 2 female consultants, and I hadn't come across either of them in the unit I worked in. So you were desperate to prove yourself. And I was just overwhelmed. And actually the paper, interesting, because I suspect I wouldn't write it, and I suspect the BMJ wouldn't publish it now. So this was, I think it was published in '92. And it starts with me actually smacking my 3-year-old in a rage, which even then, obviously I felt very exposed about, but I don't think I'd even dare tell anyone these days. It only happened once, I promise you. But it was the sort of end of my tether, and I was writing about how difficult it was being a mother and a psychiatrist, and feeling ill all the time. But one of the important things about that paper was I was looking at the date, so I didn't send it off to the BMJ till sort of 5 years after I'd first written it. And I think sometimes when we write, time is actually really important. And it, you know, I was much better and on top of things when it actually did get published. And I think if I'd been tempted to publish it earlier when I was still feeling very overwhelmed, that would have probably been a mistake from my point of view.
Yeah, okay. And I think that...
I can
actually,
just...
Yeah, Benji, carry on.
I was just going to add to that, that thing about sharing these unsavory sides to us. I had that experience with in my writing. My book opens with a scene where I'm very compassion fatigued, and A&E are trying to refer someone who's suicidal but has survived after jumping off Suicide Bridge, and I'm just overwhelmed in referrals and just trying to bounce it and try and make it somebody else's problem when I asked which side of Suicide Bridge they jumped off, because that bridge divided the North team and the South team, and we were the South team. And a lot of people, even though obviously that makes me sound very callous and uncaring, it was very interesting for me to share that with readers, to, you know, quite a large audience, and for the world not to end, and if anything, actually, for people to identify with that, and to and for me to realize that this is unfortunate, that's not totally, it wasn't necessarily me. I think it's more I had become this monster as a consequence of being in this system. And so I actually found it very therapeutic to share the more unsightly sides to myself. And interestingly, I discovered that the world didn't end. If anything, people were like, oh yeah, that's really honest. I've sometimes done stuff like that.
Yeah, and I can totally understand that. And I know that when I read your book, and particularly that chapter, or I think I might have heard you at a comedy club, doing readings from your book a few years ago, and that really resonated with me, because that feeling at 2:00 in the morning, the first thing you think is, why did you do it tonight? Why not tomorrow night when I'm not on call? And that, I mean, that's such an uncompassionate, horrible response to someone's distress and pain. But you are, when you're on your knees and you're desperate, it's not an uncommon feeling, I think, for healthcare professionals to have that. And then you're left with this real sense of, oh God, what have I done? What have I said? What do I do about it? And I think that's where writing can really help. I mean, Helen, bringing you in at that point, what techniques in writing, and when you've worked with healthcare professionals, what creative writing techniques have you found to be most helpful? Because obviously Penny and Benji are published authors, and have been writing a lot of the time for a long time, therapeutically, and for the polished piece at the end. What would you kind of say has helped most those that you've worked with in healthcare?
I suppose the thing about reflection is I've noticed a very different landscape from doing a lot of community engaged work with various groups. And when it comes to reflection, it's a completely different process than it is coming into an undergraduate class where everybody's got an iPad in front of them and has to basically reflect to a question and post it up on a board and share it with their peers. It's a completely different to working out in the community with a group of carers, for example, and we've got big sheets of paper, we've got coloured pencils, we've got the whole thing. You don't have to go anywhere near screens. You can reflect in your own way. You can draw pictures if you want to. And so that it's a very personalised process, and this is just my experience, and I know there are probably people out there who do it very differently and very creatively, but my experience has been very reflection within the undergraduate classroom is quite stifling and not very creative. But working with healthcare professionals within that kind of continuing professional development environment, I suppose. The magic tool has been free writing. It's been very much a revelation for a lot of people, actually. And it's something that we all do, whether we know we do it or not. And it's something that once we label it, we think, oh yeah, I do that anyway. So free writing, just basically having a prompt. It could be a word, an object, an image, a thought, and using that as a springboard for just writing and letting the words flow. So it's almost just being in that moment and letting the words come out. True free writing is to set a timer. I will write for 3 minutes without stopping. I will not stop and censor myself. I will not use punctuation if I don't need to. I won't worry about my spelling. If I run out of things to say, I'll just repeat the last word I said, the last word I said, the last word I said, until I think of the next thing to write, and so on and so on. And actually, people find themselves being taken off in directions they never expected to be taken. They find stuff coming in that's been sitting in their heads. Memories come out, stories come out, poems come out, lists come out. And the other thing that comes out is it's quite joyful and fun as well, because there are no rules to it. There are guidelines, but my kind of take on it is you take it where you want to take it. If you want to keep writing, you keep writing. Ignore that alarm. So I think, that is just that whole freedom of free writing, I think is a good tool.
And I think that probably brings us on really nicely to the next kind of question that I was going to ask in terms of, we know particularly in residency doctors, resident doctors, that they're facing real kind of unprecedented pressures. They have debts that a lot of the kind of seniors above them never came out of university with, so high amounts of debt. Huge uncertainty at the moment with a lot of careers that they're facing. There are high levels of burnout. There's increased absenteeism at work, particularly related to mental health since the pandemic, I think, and obviously with the strikes that we're seeing. There's poor retention from graduation to specialty training, and obviously a mass exodus of doctors that we keep being told is coming. I think Chris Whitty talked about that yesterday. There are these huge demands, and I think it's quite clear that current pastoral support systems just aren't working. We're really struggling to support doctors in the way that they need to be supported at the moment. I think that's trainees and consultants. So, Penny, maybe if you could maybe contribute here, how can we kind of provide safe space in a meaningful way and do things differently and be a bit bolder and a bit more creative and a bit less restrictive with how we get doctors to look after themselves through more creative, reflective practices?
I think it's being bold about the relationship with the students and our trainees. I think somehow they've got to own it as their problem, and they've got to come up with a solution rather than yet another prescribed, you must do this and it's got to be handed in by Friday or whatever. I would be very open with students almost from the first day, and I think that's key actually, that whatever you do has to be right from the start, so it becomes a sort of natural part of being a medical student and then a doctor. But I would really early on be really honest about the sort of stuff you're talking about. They're not stupid. They know they're going into a profession where morale is really low, where debts are really high and all these things. I would be very honest about that. I would be honest about the statistic that we've known for years, decades. I think the research was originally done on my cohort of medical students, and I started in 1976. So we've known for decades this awful statistic that actually medical students start off much more empathic than they are at the end of their training, and that empathy deteriorates even more in the first years of being a junior doctor. We know that. Now, I would have been horrified to be told that when I was 18, but I actually think we should be telling our students that and really getting some sort of, group wisdom about how to deal with that, and coming up with creative writing and the sort of things Helen's talking about as one possible way to stop that happening.
Benji, anything to add to that?
No, not really. I think I agree with everything Penny said. Yeah.
Okay, well then I'm going to ask you, Benji, to kind of pause our discussion, and if you can share a reading from your book with us, and then I will ask you some questions about it, if that's all right.
Okay. Right. Hi, folks. This is my book, just to shamelessly plug it. I will read you. I've started writing a second book though, and this is a reading from the the second book.
A preview, I think.
Preview, yeah. During the day in London, hundreds of psychiatrists look after the mind. Oh, just some context. This is a story about my very first weekend on call. During the day in London, hundreds of psychiatrists look after the capital's minds, but at night, there are like 4 of us. Because if there's one thing the mentally ill are famous for, it's long contented sleeps. I was called at 4 a.m. to see a man brought in early by police who'd been running around naked except for a bobble hat. Darren had no psychiatric history, but his urine drug screen was positive for amphetamines and he couldn't remember when he'd last slept. Now, quick math-style GCSE question time here. If someone who usually smokes 40 cigarettes a day is locked in the psych room for 12 hours, how many times will they bang on the door and scream? Now, because this is a lovely conference, I have softened the language a bit. Let me out for a peeping fag, you beep, 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 useless beeps. Yes? Yes, the answer is A, shitloads. But there was a problem. Security on the other side of the reinforced door kept saying that this was now a smoke-free hospital. To smoke, you had to leave hospital property entirely at risk of never coming back, plus you needed to have cigarettes. As I watched Darren on the CCTV, this 90% naked man punching and drop-kicking the door, he did look a bit like the sort of person who could be a danger to himself or others. The sort of person who I should probably section. But also, as an ex-smoker myself, I knew that desperate feeling of just needing to have a cig. I asked the matron in A&E if we kept a spare supply for emergencies like this, and she looked at me like I'd invited her on a tandem cycling holiday. So I decided to just go to the shop. Halfway out of A&E, though, my pager went off again. Damn, mission over already. As I turned to go back inside, I noticed a man in a One Love hoodie sitting on a bench in the dark making a roll-up. Excuse me, mate, any chance I could have that? I explained I just had this really agitated patient. I just really thought it could help to calm him down. He finished the roll, handed it to me and said, I think it probably could. What a good bloke, I thought. What a thoroughly lovely man. Okay, I sense some of you a bit ahead of me on this. And I returned to A&E holding this precious rollie aloft like the Olympic torch. I told Darren that if he put on some clothes from the hospital's lost property and went out, he could go to smoke with security if he promised not to run away. And then I'd come back and see him after dealing with my more urgent calls in these other A&Es I'd just been called about. He stopped banging, we had a deal. So I went to see my more urgent patients, but then got stuck in those A&Es, so I had to hand over for the day team to review my 40-a-day man, Darren. I went home and slept. When I woke up, though, in the afternoon, I had like 20 missed calls from the hospital's clinical director. Hello, is everything all right? No, not really, Benji. What part of you as a new psychiatrist thinks it's appropriate to give agitated patients a spliff? It wasn't a spliff, was it? I had a flashback to the bloke in the Bob Marley hoodie. That impish smile as he'd handed over the roll-up, which maybe hadn't just been a roll-up. Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I just got it off some random guy on the street. Benji, why are you giving patients stuff from random guys on the street? I'm really sorry. Did he run away or something? How the hell could he run away? He was half-baked. Security had to carry him back inside. Then he slept for 12 hours. Oh, good. I don't think he'd slept for a week, actually. How was he when he woke up? Yeah, much better, actually. Bit embarrassed to hear he'd been running around naked. Thought he'd just overdone a cocaine bender, so they discharged him home in the end, but that's not the point. A good outcome, though. Yeah, but Benji's problem for me now is what the hell am I going to put in the notes? Seen by new psychiatrist who gave him some cannabis from some random bloke off the street. Slept for 12 hours, devoured 2 breakfasts in A&E. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to refer you to the General Medical Council for this one, but I want you to know this is really stressful for me too, but what else can I do? And I resisted the urge to suggest having a joint. What? Really? I said, I've only been doing the job a week. If I get struck off, it's not like someone's going to come in and replace me. Please, just put that I gave him what I thought was a cigarette, which is the truth. There was a long pause, then he said, okay, but just keep this between us and don't tell anyone.
So I think Benji, that story really showcases your ability to use humour to describe patients. And for anyone who's read Benji's first book, I think you'd all agree that Benji has this amazing ability to really combine this kind of the laughter, I guess, at the absurdity of the situations you find yourself in medicine, but never laughing at the patient. So the patient is never the butt of the jokes, and it's a real art, I think, that you do that. And humour, I'm sure we can all agree, humour is so important in medicine. It's how we often get through shifts and through difficult cases. We use storytelling. We recount, hopefully without clinical details, but we recount patient stories and experiences. And it's quite a protective tool, I think. There's a certain amount of dark humour in medicine, or black humour, that's really helpful. But how, Benji, how do you use humour, and how have you found it helpful in your writing, and obviously in your stand-up comedy shows, to help you manage your clinical encounters? But also, how do you kind of encourage students to use humour without trivialising situations and patients?
Well, as you said, I find that humour is the kind of can help to make the intolerable more tolerable, and I do feel that the NHS often runs on gallows humour, doesn't it? Along with strong tea, and I've noticed that you can, as long as you said, the butt of the joke is kind and it's never the patient, it's never punching down. You can even make lightness of or do jokes about quite serious things. So, for example, I've got a bit in my first book about where I was trying to section someone, which is obviously a very serious topic, but I was so tired that when completing the section papers, I accidentally mixed up the box for the patient's name and my own, and technically sectioned myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so I find it helpful personally, but also I think you mentioned, how do you find it? Do you find it helpful with patients? Sometimes I do. I think, again, it can sort of be grounded to obviously a sensitive. It doesn't always work. I remember once a patient was understandably very angry that I couldn't let them leave the locked ward. And they said to me, like, who the hell are you to keep me here? Like, you're just like a middle-class white boy who probably decided to be a psychiatrist after your mum once forgot to pick you up from cricket. And so I thought I would try and diffuse the tension with a joke. And I said, it was actually my au pair. And in that moment, he did agree not to kick my head in, which kind of worked, actually. Yeah. But I think I think psychiatry is not the only specialism. It's funny, yeah. The reason why I'm sorry, I don't know, not to overshare, but the reason I'm with you is I've basically crunched my ankle quite badly, and I might even have to have an operation on it. And I was just getting a boot today in A&E, and I was seeing this surgeon. I'm very nervous about. He was examining it. I've said I've never had an operation before. If he's talking about you might have to operate on it, and he saw I was anxious. He said, "Oh, don't worry, I've never done one either." And he said, "But don't worry, I've seen some YouTube videos." And kind of that actually did help in that kind of patient-doctor exchange as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in humour.
Yeah, and I think actually that, just thinking about that, so one of the things that Benji and I have worked on at Leicester Medical School, and that we're now expanding to Leicester Medical School and Nottingham, is a book club using Benji's book for medical students. And we've had students read together, so shared reading, taking sections of Benji's book, and then being facilitated. We have an associate professor of English who works with us and facilitates these book club discussions. And I think that I'll be honest, like initially, they were pretty horrified that they were going to come to a book club. They thought that we'd written a typo in the email, and it's just a bit like, what, we're medical students, why why on earth would we want to come to a book club? Why would we be interested in reading and writing? And by the end of this I think they did 4 or 5 sessions, and by the end of the 3-month period that they did each session over, they were complete converts, have really enjoyed it, and it's really helped, I think, seeing, listening to and reading together a consultant talk about some of the difficulties they've had, some of the problems they've had, and use humour, appropriately, and make them laugh, make them feel quite anxious at times, make them feel something, I guess, as a very junior medical student. They've really enjoyed it, and Benji came up and spoke to the students earlier this year and gave them a presentation. I think, Benji, you were quite surprised at the level of detail of their questions, if you can remember. You seemed a little taken aback with some. I think they were quite probing with their questions. But I think having that opportunity, giving students, but like you were saying, Penny, telling them this is the reality of life as a doctor sometimes. Did you find it difficult, Benji, talking to the students, or did you enjoy it?
No, I found it very refreshing. And as you say, they asked quite probing questions that are good to think about. Like, they were saying things like, weren't they, do you think your book is like counterproductive? Is it unhelpful?
Yeah, I mean, they put you on the spot.
Yeah, but as I was saying to them, I don't see my job as being like the PR guy for psychiatry. I just kind of speak the truth as I see it, and kind of, if people don't like the sound of it, well, then I think we as a society need to think about that and come up with something better.
Yeah. And I think it's really refreshing, kind of having, I think, as I said in my introduction, the often hidden side of mental health care explored and exposed, but in a way that patients are not harmed, I guess.
There's something really important, isn't there, about saying what no one else is saying.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the bit that's missing? It's like there's so much kind of canned rhetoric and PR these days, and I think actually finding the things that aren't being said is really important, and I think that can be done with humour. Sometimes it helps us see the funny side of things, but
it does. Helen, I'm just going to pull you in for a moment, because I suppose what I was alluding to as well with Benji is that difficulty of engaging. Sometimes medical students, sometimes doctors. I mean, Helen and I run some CPD sessions at the Stonygate Centre for Empathic Healthcare, and it's usually self-selected clinicians that come to those sessions. They want to come and learn creative writing skills, reflective writing skills. But we also run sessions for all students, mandatory sessions for students, and have gone in and starting to work with NHS teams. There can be a little bit of mild reluctance, and occasionally people can be outrightly hostile about why they do not want to engage in this. So, what tips then do you have, or what for academics and for educators who are thinking about how can I engage my trainees, or how can I help my colleagues to kind of take part in this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, in most of my workshops, I like to pitch it as it's an invitation to write. You don't have to write. And then people tend to kind of join in anyway, which is quite good. But you do get particularly healthcare professionals who they will engage, they'll take part, they'll have a go at the free writing, but they'll sit there and go, yeah, that was great, but why are we doing it? Why are we doing this? So it's about the bit that is alien to me, I suppose, is the science stuff. So it's about providing that evidence about why this works. Even in just a small scale format, references to some studies, some of the key figures, some of the actual terms under that umbrella of therapeutic writing. So, poetry therapy, where did that come from? Expressive writing, where did that come from? Who are the key pioneers in these fields? And giving them that kind of evidence base so that they know that there is some theory to this, there is some kind of substance to it, but also recognising that it is just one tool, and creative writing isn't for everyone, and it's not a one size fits all, and sometimes sort of being in a workshop situation, People might not be in the zone to write. There might not be the right time, the right place for them. But the other approach is, I suppose, it's like with humour, it's kind of near cousin playfulness is something that I like to draw on quite a lot. So being very playful with words, being curious, not having, breaking the rules, not just not having rules, but breaking the rules. Because one of the other things that comes very close behind in the sort of the reticence to write is the, well, what do I have to do? The kind of expecting to follow instructions, and sometimes there aren't really instructions. So it's actually just having that faith to just follow wherever you want to go in your writing journey, I suppose, as well.
Okay. And so in the last kind of 5 minutes, I just wanted to bring the discussion kind of back, I guess, to educators and thinking about, going on a course or learning to write professionally, to write a book or something is great if you have the time for that. But there's many techniques that can be taught and utilised through sessions with trainees as an educational supervisor or as a clinical supervisor working with junior doctors. So Penny and Benji, maybe Penny first, kind of what simple practices have you found helpful for yourself and maybe that you've offered trainees?
Well, I was lucky enough to specialise as a psychotherapist, and there is a culture of psychotherapy where trainees journal. And we always, well, I certainly always emphasise again, it's always it's voluntary. And I always say, don't try and do it every day, unless you like doing that. I mean, some people really like getting into a groove and knowing that at a particular time they're going to be sitting there with their pen and paper or whatever. And just pick out what's important, what's really hit you. So I think journaling can be important. I often give out books to trainees, and there's lots of, we live in an age where there's so many very well-written medical memoirs. In psychiatry, there's Benji's, of course, and there's Gwen Adshead. There's Henry Marsh's one, which, of course, is a really famous book. There's Catherine Mannix one on end-of-life care is wonderful. So that there's a rich literature out there which I think can be really helpful. I guess, again, I don't want to box it in. It's just kind of creating the conditions where, for some of them, writing can be a real lifeline, actually, and get them through what's going to be a difficult career.
Benji?
Yeah, I suppose, to try and keep it in I suppose the purist in me likes to think that I did, at least in the beginning, start reflecting and writing without looking to later monetize it. But I can see that obviously that is what a lot of doctors are now, with the Adam Kay market. Everyone thinks they've got a book in them, don't they? Think that's their out potentially. So, but yeah, just in addition to journaling and diarying, which I have always done anyway, and I certainly never published that stuff. I also find I sometimes talk to if people are curious about writing, I speak to them about morning pages, which is like a sort of morning practice of, but it doesn't have to be in the morning, of just, it's that same philosophy of free writing without censorship, without even necessarily reading over it again. And I think that helps you to kind of keep it in its more pure form. And confer the benefits that you get. Yeah.
I was remembering on the train that, as a medical student, this is history for some of you, but we used to write letters home every week. When I don't suppose everybody did, but most of the people I knew did. And I imagine for some people that was a chore, but I absolutely loved it. And I found these letters recently after my parents died. They were sort of shut away in a cupboard. And I couldn't believe it, actually, reading them. There was so much life in them and so much indignation and rage and little funny cartoons of me puking up, doing dissection and all kind of written in this very young, very naive. I'm sure I was exaggerating some of the stories, but it must have been so helpful, actually, and that was just, I didn't think of it as creative writing or therapeutic. It was just part of life, so it's finding our own way to do it, isn't it?
I suppose as well it's worth adding the kind of reflective writing techniques like free writing. If you are wanting to write for money or to write a lovely polished piece of work. It can be a really good way of just generating raw material that you can then shape and craft into something as well. So even for academic writing as well, just doing that free writing and clearing the mind can be a really good starting point.
So I think we are, the little timer's gone orange, which means we're almost out of time. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Benji, Helen and Penny for leading our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Penny, I know Penny has brought with her some copies of On the Brink, and I can really recommend it. So if you would like a copy, Penny will be here for a few minutes. And Benji, sorry, I didn't bring any of your books. I could have been an agent for you. But get out to Waterstones and buy it. Honestly, it's very funny and very touching. And when is the new book out?
When I've finished writing it.
Okay, so 2028 or something. But, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.